Hello students, this is Beryl Reshmi Auras meeting you all through this virtual platform. I'll be handling literary critiques in a broadcast paper for you. Have completed your first unit and in this video I'll be dealing with Sir Philip Sidney and his critical views. Sir Philip Sidney was the model of an Elizabethan courtier and gentleman. As far as this paper is concerned, you need not give much importance to the life of the author. But an incident from Sir Philip Sidney's life has been shared in order to present his gentlemanliness. Once Sir Philip Sidney was badly wounded in a war. He was too thirsty, so someone helped him with a bottle of water. But Sir Philip Sidney didn't take the water. He gave it to a fellow soldier who was also equally wounded, and he said, "I quote, thy needs are greater than mine." End quote. There is a history behind Sir Philip Sidney's literary criticism too. There was a man named Stephen Gosson. He published a book titled School of Abuse. The School of Abuse is merely an attack on poetry. Stephen Gosson found faults with the poets and their poetry. Stephen Gosson published this book School of Abuse and dedicated it to Sir Philip Sidney. Now, Sir Philip Sidney is left in a position to respond to this work. So, Sir Philip Sidney reads the work carefully and finds out that Stephen Gosson's ideas of poetry is totally unconvincing for him. Sir Philip Sidney's ideas of poetry is totally different from Stephen Gosson's idea of poetry. So, Sir Philip Sidney decides to reply to the charges made by Stephen Gosson against poetry. So he comes up with his own critical ideas and his own literary critical book titled An Apology for Poetry. So this Apology for Poetry is an attempt to defend poetry. It is an argument against Stephen Gosson's ideas of poetry. So here too, Philip Sidney maintains his gentlemanliness. He never mentions Stephen Gosson's name anywhere in the text. But he carefully replies to each and every charge made by Stephen Gosson against poetry. Also, this age of Philip Sidney can be considered as a dry age in literature because no great poetry or criticism has been produced during that age. But even then, Philip Sidney managed to defend poetry against all the charges made against poetry. Before getting into Sir Philip Sidney's arguments, let's take a look at Stephen Gosson's charges. Stephen Gosson made 4 charges against poetry. Stephen Gosson found 4 faults with poetry, and it is an important question too. The first charge is that a man could employ his time more usefully than in poetry. So, if you are reading or writing poetry, you are wasting your time. You can make much better use of your time. Why are you wasting your time in reading and writing poetry? The second charge is that poetry is the mother of lies. This charge against poetry is prevalent even in the 21st century against different forms of literature. Now, actually this art of reading poetry is slowly fading out. And now we can take other genres of literature, for example, say a novel or a movie. If you are sharing a storyline of a movie or a novel with your parents or grandparents, their reply will be, "எல்லாம் கள்ளக்கதைகள், வாழ்க்கைக்கு உதவாது." So, literature is full of lies. Novels and movies are full of lies. Poetry is full of lies. The next charge, it's a nurse of abuse. Now again, if some rape or murder happens somewhere in the society, the immediate response will be everything is because of this media. During our time, we were not exposed to these televisions or mobile phones or computers. Then nothing happened. Now these youngsters are watching movies, reading novels, or watching series, whatever it may be. That's why all these things are happening in this world. So, it's the media that spoils the people. It's literature that spoils people. It's poetry, it's the nurse of abuse. And the last point, Plato had rightly banished poets from his ideal commonwealth. So now, Plato has already banished poets, and this man, Stephen Hawson, is seconding Plato, telling that whatever he has does is right. So moving on to the arguments of Philip Sidney. Philip Sidney does not defend poetry from the charges made by Stephen Hawson alone. So Philip Sidney defends poetry from all the charges that has been made against it ever since Plato. Sidney analyzes poetry just like a logician do. For example, there are people who never watch movies at all. But if you ask them why are they not watching any movies, their reply will be, nowadays movies are not good. They are not still watching movies. Then how come they know that movies are not good? They are telling so because everybody is telling so. They are not analyzing the things. They are just hearing things and they are reproducing it. But Philip Sidney is not doing so. And there are other kind of people who tries to prove that Christianity is the best religion because they are following Christianity. They follow Hinduism, so they want to prove that Hinduism is the best religion. If they love poetry, they'll be telling that poetry is the best form of art. But Sir Philip Sidney is not like that. He reads out the charges that has been produced against poetry and also reads out things that has been written in favor of poetry. Only after reading both the sides, he comes to the conclusion. He concludes that poetry deserves the laurel crown. Poetry can be appreciated even in heaven. Next, he compares poetry with all the fields of learning. And he says that poetry is the oldest of all branches of learning. It's poetry that laid the foundation for other knowledges. Okay. So after comparing with other branches of learning in general, he compares it with individual branches of learning. First, he compares poetry with philosophy, and he says that poetry is superior to philosophy by its charm. I'll make it clear. Slow and steady wins the race. This is a philosophy. If I keep on telling philosophies like that, it will be boring. But literature adds charm to it. So now I will say, once upon a time, there lived a hare and a tortoise. They decided to go for a race. So now the story adds charm to the philosophy. So literature is superior to philosophy. Now Philip Sidney is speaking from poet's point of view, poetry's point of view. So I'll be giving examples from poetry too. In this world, you can sit back, relax, enjoy, have fun. or if everything is okay, but you have some goals to be accomplished, you have some responsibilities to be done, so you have to move on and work for it. This is a philosophy. The American poet Robert Frost too wants to tell this philosophy, but he didn't say so. He said he gave an explanation about an evening scenario in America. He explained about the woods, he explained about the weather, and he explained about the pleasure it gave to him. And only then he said, in the last stanza, he says, "The woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." Philosophy comes at the end. Before that, you have something to add charm to your feelings and emotions. That's what poetry is. So, poetry is superior to philosophy. And second, poetry is superior to history by its universality. For example, say if you are reading History of India's Independence. For you, Mahatma Gandhi, Subhash Chandra Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru are great leaders, great freedom fighters. But for a British who is reading India's independence, Mahatma Gandhi is the enemy. Subhash Chandra Bose is his enemy. They are the people who drew British out of the nation. So history differs from nation to nation. But poetry is not like that. Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost remains the same for an Indian or American or European or Australian, whoever may be. And then, poetry is superior to science by its moral end. So science presents facts. Science says that so and so has invented this. You can make use of this for this particular purpose. For example, I can say Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel invented dynamite. But you don't know the aftermath of it. How his invention made him suffer psychologically. You can read it out in literature. Science just presents inventions. But it's poetry that teaches you how you should make use of these inventions, how they are going to affect your life. All these things comes with literature, comes with poetry. So no moral teachings happens in science, but moral teachings happens in poetry. And last, superior to law by its encouragement of human goodness. Honesty is the best policy. So if you are dishonest, you will be punished by the court of law. So law is threatening you or frightening you with a punishment. If you make some mistake, you will be punished by the law. You will be taken to jail or you will be beaten badly. This poetry, it's not threatening you, but it's inspiring you to be good. So it's encouraging people to be good. So poetry is superior to law. And then he speaks about different genres of poetry, different species of poetry. So under that, the first variety he talks about is pastoral. Pastoral is a kind of poetry which comments on the lifestyle of the people living in rural areas, villages. Lifestyle of a farmer that gets presented in Farmers and Shepherds gets presented in this pastoral. And then elegy. Elegy mourns for the death of the loved ones. So while mourning for the death, it presents the temporariness of life in this world, the human weakness and the sadness that's prevailing in this earth. And then satire ridicules the folly. So satire makes fun of our superstitious beliefs or our customs, traditions, practices, and so on. Next, comedy. Comedy makes fun of the errors that we will make in our daily life. Because of our carelessness or senselessness, we make some errors. that may make others laugh at. It's comedy. The difference between satire and comedy you might have learned in your Aristotle essay. So next time, moving on to tragedy. Tragedy presents the troubles in our life, the mistakes we make and the consequences that we face in this life. And lyric praises the praiseworthy, praises great people. And epic too, it presents the life of great people in an elegant manner, that is epic. And now, Sidney moves on to reply to the charges made by Stephen Gosson. So the first charge is, if you are reading and writing poetry, you are wasting your time. But Philip Sidney is saying that the best kind of learning is that learning which teaches virtue and moves you towards virtue. Virtues means good characters. So, if learning teaches you some good characters and inspires you to follow some good characters, it's the best form of learning. And it happens only with poetry and not in other forms of learning, other branches of learning. So only in poetry, this poetry teaches you the virtues and also makes you follow all those virtues, moves you towards the virtues. So it's the best learning that can ever happen in this earth. If you are using your pen and paper to write poetry, it can never be used for a better purpose than this. Stephen Gosson says that if you are reading and writing poetry, you are wasting your time. But Philip Sidney says that reading and writing poetry is the best ever thing that you can do. Best ever thing that can be produced with pen and paper is poetry. Next, second charge. So here, we have already discussed, it's the mother of lies, full of lies. So the reply Philip Sidney gives is that no author, no poet ever says that I am going to tell some real story that happened somewhere. They agree that they are presenting some fictional stories. They are not presenting real life stories, but they are presenting these fictional stories. And they want to make things clear for the people. They want to bring higher truths to the people. For example, if you take a movie and if a murder happens in the movie or a rape that happens in the movie is not encouraging people to murder or it's not encouraging people to rape. It's just telling that the anti-hero or the villain will be doing all these negative things. These are negative things. You should stop this. That's the aim of the author. He is presenting negative things, but he is not asking you to follow it. He is calling you to make a full stop to that. This negative thing should not happen in earth anymore. That's why he is presenting it through the movies. So he is not a liar. He is not telling lies. He just presents reality. And another thing, when I ask you to write a story, your story will definitely be based on something you have already heard or you have already seen. It's not something that happens just like that. It's something that you have already heard or you have already seen. So the source for all these movies or poetry is taken from real life, something that has already happened in the life, and the author or the director or the producer does not want this same thing to be repeated in this earth. That's why they are presenting it in the media and they are trying to stop it. So does poetry. They are not lying. They are presenting fictional stories of reality and they want to put an end mark to all these negative things and to achieve at a higher fact, higher truth. And the third charge, this is something I've already said, It's not poetry that abuses man's wit, but it is man's wit that abuses poetry. As I said earlier, the storylines never come from somewhere. It has already happened in reality, and that gets presented in movies or poetries or whatever genres of literature it may be. So, it is the human mind, it's a human brain, human intelligence that is spoiling poetry. It's not poetry that is spoiling human mind. And if you are judging something, say if I ask about okay whether cell phone is good or bad, your answers will be good because you are using it. You cannot say that cell phone is very bad because I am misusing it. So does poetry. There are so much of positive things associated with it. But if human mind sees it in the other way around, poetry cannot be blamed for that. And the fourth charge is that Plato does not the reply to the fourth charge, that is, the fourth charge said that okay, Plato has rightly banished poet from his ideal republic. So here, Philip Sidney says that Plato found fault with the poets of his time, not with poetry, not with the genre of poetry. The poets of his time did some mistakes. That's why he banished them from the ideal republic. That is, those poets of his time misrepresented God. You might have learned in your Tamil Kadal Valthu செயல் and all, there will be a line telling, Adiyan எழுதுகிறேன் சிவபெருமானே துணை புரிவாயே. That's how it ends. Similarly, in those days, they believed that only with divine assistance, that is the assistance of God, you can write poetry. Divinely inspired people can write poetry. Otherwise, you can't write poetry. So, the poets of the age of Plato, misrepresented God. That's why Plato got angry and he banished poet from his ideal republic. But he never found fault with poetry in general. Okay? He considered poetry as something is divinely inspired, something that is given by God. So he doesn't find fault with poetry. That's how he replied to the 4 charges made by Stephen Coulson. So next part of his criticism we can see in the next class. So if you have any doubts, you can post in the comment section, or you can WhatsApp me too. So thank you.